There we go. I'm reminded, I used to be a reporter, like you guys, and years ago when I was in my 20s, and I remember at City Hall, the DEA, we had this little press availability thing at City Hall in Los Angeles, and they crowded us into a room and put us off to the side, and they had said that they had this really new instrument and tool they could use to clamp down on drug users, and it was dogs that could sniff out marijuana. And they put us in the room and they said, now look, we've hidden 2 little packages of marijuana in the room, and when we let these dogs go, they're going to go and find that marijuana. You'll be able to see what a great tool it's going to be. So they let the dogs go. And the dogs ran over and jumped right up onto a reporter.
All right, bring out the dogs.
I don't know how I ever got out of that one. Look, okay, today is a happy day because we are announcing a bipartisan coalition to try to do something that's really important for our country and the well-being of our people, something that's been controversial for a long time, but we are stepping forward together to say we've got to make major changes in our country's attitude towards cannabis. And if we do, many people are going to live better lives, and it's going to be better for our country, better for people, and it makes economic sense at a time when every penny must count for government. And so today, I'm proud to announce the establishment of the Congressional Cannabis Caucus. Representative Earl Blumenauer, Don Young, and Jared Polis, my colleagues with me today, are the co-chairman of this caucus. And we will be trying to do everything we can to keep the momentum going that we've established in these last 4 and 5 years, that as we've seen great progress on this issue. And now with a new administration, it's vitally important that we pay attention and that we don't do this half-heartedly and haphazardly, and that we get together and have a professional presentation to the people of the United States and to our fellow members of why it's important for us to take the policies that have not worked in the United States and hurt people on top of it when it comes to cannabis and change those policies so that it works for the people of this country. To date, 44 states have enacted laws to varying degrees of permitting cannabis. And as you know, the Rohrabacher Farr Amendment for these last 3 and 4 years have prevented the federal government or any expenditure of federal money, and that means federal agents, from going in and superseding state law in those areas where the state governments and local governments have basically legalized the use of cannabis. We have to protect that step forward, but the next step forward we need to do is to make sure that, number one, recreational marijuana protections are considered seriously, but also in those states that have had reform on marijuana, that they are backed up in the sense that we will state, and I have a bill, H.R. 975, Respect State Marijuana Law Act of 2017. That act will make sure that at the federal level, whatever we're doing, whatever agency or department at the federal level must conduct itself toward marijuana and cannabis industries in any state where they have declared the state law to, especially if they are liberalizing the law or they're actually making it legal, that those federal agencies and departments have to treat that entity as is consistent with that state law. So thus, when we have a lot of banking and other restrictions for people in the marijuana industry, that this will now take care of that, because the people who handle federal regulation of banks and transactions have to operate under the standards that have been set up by the state themselves in terms of cannabis. So with that said, that is an important next step, I believe. We have some other areas that we want to make sure medical research, etc. And I will leave that up to my colleagues to express. But I believe this is a really important date. It's a kickoff of a new administration in Washington, where we don't know, where that's going to land yet. But we know that we're going to do our part to continue the progress of making sure that people have a right to live their lives, and adults have a right, a freedom, and should have the freedom to basically consume cannabis for either medical purposes or otherwise, if that's what they agree to in the states in which they reside. So with that, Mr. Blumenauer.
Thank you. Thank you, Dana. And thank you for your longstanding leadership, being on point on these issues. I would like to thank my colleagues, Congressman Young, good, Congressman Polis, and especially Dana Rohrabacher, with whom I've had privilege to work on an ongoing basis. We formed a cannabis working group in 2013 so that staff members of people who care about this legislation could come together and figure out approaches on a cooperative basis. And we've had some significant successes. Dana referenced one of them. But now it's time for a formal Cannabis Caucus. I've been working in this space literally for decades. I was part of the Oregon legislature when Oregon became the first state in the union to decriminalize marijuana. I've been deeply concerned about the gap between where the public is, what is rational policy, and where the federal government is. It's interesting to note that this movement to legalize cannabis has been driven at the state and local level. We've starting in California in 1996, Oregon, Arizona with medical marijuana. We saw in 2012, and my colleague Jared Polis will talk maybe a little bit about the Colorado experience. We saw this wave crest this November with 8 states moving successful ballot measures to expand adult use or medical marijuana. We're at the point now where 95% of the American public are in states or territories where some aspect of marijuana or medical marijuana is available. So it's time for us to move with this bipartisan caucus. There's a lot of work to be done. We've had over 24 pieces of legislation, successful amendments, but now we're going to be focusing, in my judgment, on 4 critical areas. One is dealing with research, and we have bipartisan legislation with Congressman Harris, who isn't necessarily a fan of cannabis, but agrees that the federal government should not interfere with research. And I've had bipartisan legislation with him. We need to make sure that we have access for our veterans who in many cases have had their lives transformed with medical marijuana. We need to make sure the Veterans Administration works with veterans in places where it's legal. That amendment passed both chambers, but somehow got lost in the backroom dealing in the last Congress. And most important, we need to deal with their practical business needs. They cannot, because of a provision called 280E, fully deduct their business expenses, requiring a much higher effective tax rate, and they have to pay those unfair taxes with cash because of the banking prohibition, which is insane. I've been working in this for years. I've never met a single person who thinks any policy objectives advanced by making this be an all-cash business. These are areas that should not be necessarily partisan. They're not complex. They will make a big difference for the industry. And having a cannabis caucus where we can work together formally, I think people will be surprised by the number of folks in the weeks ahead that will join up on a bipartisan basis to advance these objectives. I was going to introduce Congressman Young, but let me introduce... Oh, there he is. You snuck back in.
You've been smoking again.
Not until it's legal at the federal level. Don Young.
Thank you, Governor.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I was listening to that presentation. I got to think of those 8 new states that passed legalized marijuana. Maybe they knew something we didn't know. Now, if you don't catch that, you're in serious trouble. But I'm here primarily. I'm a conservative, Republican, but I believe in states' rights. Alaska voted to legalize it, pretty large margin, and I believe that in states' rights and the federal government should stay out of it. Period. But I'm also interested in the banking part of it. I've been around a long time, and I've watched where a great amount of surplus cash is available. It causes lots of sideline problems. And my goal was to make sure that if I am in the business, like we have quite a few in Alaska now, as they do this business, they can run it as a business, get loans from banks, and put the revenue back into the banks as every other business does. I think that's crucially important to make it work correctly. So I'm here with this caucus, got a strange caucus in a sense. I just was killed a puppy killer by Mr. Polis. And it goes to show you we are bipartisan. This is an issue we both agree on. And we can disagree on other things, but it's good to work on something that we believe is good for the country and good for those states that move forth aggressively, pass the law by the people. Remember, we are supposed to represent the people. So I'm excited about the caucus. We'll see what happens. I think we can make a lot of progress this session and next session. A lot of education is going to take place, but we'll be able to do it. With that, thank you.
Thank you. That's okay. I definitely didn't accuse you, Mr. Young, of being a puppy killer. I said the bill was a puppy-killing bill. I'm glad to stand here today with my colleagues, Mr. Young and Mr. Rohrabacher and Mr. Blumenauer, to announce the formation of a formal bipartisan group, the Cannabis Caucus. We represent very diverse districts in very diverse states, from deep red to purple to blue, from mountains to coasts. We represent the overwhelming majority of Americans, as Mr. Blumenauer said, who now live in jurisdictions that allow either medicinal or recreational or some legal form of marijuana consumption. And this caucus is very important and very timely to defend the direction that the American people in many states have chosen to go. It makes no sense that under federal law, marijuana is classified alongside heroin and cocaine. From banking to housing to taxes to small businesses to jobs to agriculture, the four of us represent districts that, frankly, will be damaged and our constituents will be hurt by overreaching federal authority because of the discrepancy between federal and state marijuana laws. And we all have our individual approaches on how to handle this, and so will every member of Congress. I personally have introduced the Regulate Marijuana Like Alcohol Act and plan to do so again this year, which would remove marijuana from controlled substances and leave the decision up to states where it frankly belongs. The legislation would not require any state that has not permitted the use of marijuana to change its policies. I'd point out, even in states like mine, Colorado, that have legalized marijuana, many counties don't allow the sale of it, and many municipalities choose not to license dispensaries. All totally appropriate under Amendment 64, which was passed by Colorado voters, taking the decision into their own hands. This caucus is important not only to talk about legislation, but because it's an opportunity to show that the consumers and entrepreneurs in the marijuana industry are an important part of the American economy, and there's an impact on jobs if the federal government doesn't repeal this outdated provision. In my home state of Colorado, I'm glad to say that initial indications of being one of the first states to allow the sale of recreational marijuana are positive. Underage use is down. Crime is down. Over $100 million in tax revenues have come in. We're really starting to see policymakers view the cannabis industry more favorably for what it is, a vibrant industry full of hardworking innovators and entrepreneurs and informed consumers. In Colorado, the initiative is a success. Our test case proves that allowing responsible adults to use marijuana if they choose can help provide money for classrooms rather than cartels, creates jobs rather than creates addicts, puts drug dealers out of business, and boosts our economy rather than our prison population. So we're well beyond the stage of determining whether Colorado made the right decision. Colorado model is working, more popular among our voters in Colorado than ever before, and voters in other states have been emboldened to follow suit in different forms with regard to allowing the regulated sale of marijuana. Our next challenge is to take the model established in Colorado and Oregon and Washington and Alaska and enable all states to follow it, free from federal bullying and federal interference. Education that this caucus will undertake will make sure that members of the Congress are aware of the issues surrounding the discrepancy in laws between the federal government and state governments, making sure that marijuana businesses get the same tax treatment, as Mr. Blumenauer mentioned, making sure that states' rights on drug policy take precedent over federal policy, as Mr. Rohrabacher mentioned, making sure that having bought marijuana will not take away your right to own a firearm, as Don Young is working on, and as a bipartisan bill I've introduced with Duncan Hunter in prior sessions. It means that ending the federal prohibition on marijuana, getting rid of the antiquated provisions that equate it with drugs like heroin, enacting a regulatory structure that we all know can work and save lives, boost the economy, and respect states' rights. I'm proud to say the majority of the House of Representatives agrees with us. They've supported and passed several amendments and appropriation bills consistent with the goals of this caucus. We've introduced a flood of bipartisan bicameral legislation to address the issues around marijuana. We hope to be able to see some of those as appropriate through all the way into law this session. And I'm confident through the hard work of this caucus, we'll soon see common sense approaches to federal marijuana law pass into law here in the United States. I want to thank all of you for being here to join us and talking about the nation's drug policy moving forward, and we'd be happy to take some questions. Yes.
Two questions. First of all, have you had any conversations with now Secretary Jeff Sessions about his plans to enforce or not enforce federal laws in states that have legalized marijuana?
I haven't yet. I would point out that on the campaign trail, President Trump indicated that he would defer to states with regard to marijuana. We're also aware of Jeff Sessions' prior policy positions as a senator. We're hoping, given that now that he works for the president, he'll maintain those policy commitments that were made during the campaign. Have any of you?
Well, it's also important to point out in the 9 states where it was on the ballot this last fall, it was my privilege to campaign around the country on those. I just have to note that marijuana got more votes than Donald Trump in those states, and millions of Trump voters voted for changing marijuana laws.
Oh, one more thing. I think all 4 of us, we don't want to be in a place where we rely on the goodwill of which side of the bed any attorney general wakes up on any given day. That's why we are pursuing statutory changes. So we certainly would encourage the attorney general to not interfere with legal actions in our states, but we want to make sure that any future attorney general, that the entire existence of our state regulatory systems doesn't depend on what side of the bed they wake up on.
Just keep in mind, and one of my pet peeves, that the media keeps saying Trump, Trump, Trump. The Congress passes the laws. The Congress is the one that makes this country run if we do our job. So I'm very happy with the idea that we butt heads if we have to with the Attorney General. We'll do our job because it's the right thing to do, and when you're right, you'll get it done.
And when we do our job, the president, we would expect the president not to veto it because he has indicated during the campaign that that would be his position. Yeah. So whatever Jeff Sessions, I know Jeff is a good friend, and let me just note that he's a man of principle, he's a man of honor. He may disagree with us on this particular issue, but he is someone who understands that the President of the United States is the one who makes the policy for the executive branch.
And we needed Mr. Rohrabacher's amendment with the Obama administration. There are 93 U.S. attorneys out there, and so This is something we need to do regardless of who's Attorney General or not.
Yes.
Hi, Tom Fitzgerald from Fox 5 here in D.C. And as you know, the district has a complicated relationship with the Congress. There was a locally passed law here, which Mr. Blumenauer, you brought up Mr. Harris. The doctor had some objections to what happened in the district last year, and there was some movement to unplug what the D.C. Council did. Could you state what your position is on D.C. having autonomy over its own cannabis laws, and whether or not your caucus would now move to defend D.C.'s local law?
Well, the caucus itself is a working group where you bring people together. There are varying degrees of enthusiasm for a variety of different proposals. I would anticipate that members of this caucus would be able to deal realistically with what this means and its implications. But I would think that the majority of people we've worked with thinks it would be hypocritical for advocacy for rational cannabis policies for 50 states and not for the District of Columbia. And they ought to be able to have the same latitude, I think, as Alaska.
I agree.
Yes.
When it comes to this particular issue,
And identify yourself, please.
Kevin Fracking with the AP. I frequently see the lawmakers here. I'm wondering, with the rank and file in Congress, what do you think the appetite is for joining this particular caucus? When you talk to them in the hallways and say, "Come join us,"
Yeah.
caucus, what's the response?
We're seeing a tremendous increase in interest because of the action the voters in several states have taken. So what really puts it on members of Congress' radar, and you're right, it was on some of our radar before our states acted, but in general, once a state has acted, members of Congress are interested in defending and working with their constituencies. So the results of this last election have frankly put it on the radar of a lot of members of Congress who frankly hadn't focused on this issue before.
Yeah, may I just say one thing? It goes back to what I've said before. This is a states' rights issue. You can't be a conservative and say we can pick and choose. You have to be either for states' rights or against states' rights. And a lot of these young members that belong to certain caucuses keep talking about, the rights of states. So I can't see them going against this type of legislation. And I really can't see that. It'd be hypocritical. Of course, we're a lot of hypocrites in this body too. But the fact is, I believe we'll be able to win it.
I'll just add what Don said, and this is really important, that if you go down to fundamental principles, if people are presenting themselves to their public as I am a principled statesman or someone who's come here with a set of guidelines, moral and ethical guidelines and principles of government to guide my decision making, when it comes to Republicans, every one of those principles would lead them to support individual freedom. How many times do we hear that? We talk about basically limited government. We talk about the constitutional divvying up of power, that we are constitutionalists. Well, the constitutionalists, of course, the people who wrote the Constitution meant criminal justice to be at the local and state level. We have militarized police forces now enforcing drug laws and marijuana laws. And sometimes we actually have them militarized, where we're giving them military equipment all around this. Our founding fathers did not want the federal government to be involved in that sort of thing at all. And these are things, and also, when we have this talk about Obamacare, we Republicans are supposed to believe, and we keep talking about it, the doctor-patient relationship. And so all of those fundamental things would lead a real principled conservative to say that no, the federal government needs to change its basic policy on cannabis right now. Because, by the way, all of my friends are going to be justifying many of the things that we accomplish. Of course, you guys won't think we're accomplishing it. They'll think it's a horrible thing that we've won this battle or something. But we're going to have battles in which the Republicans are going to be saying, we're doing this because we're going to leave it up to the states, including my friend Jeff Sessions. We're going to leave this or that up to the states. Well, I'm sorry, you can't make that argument over here and then just ignore the fact that it's applicable to this other area of decision making. So I think that we're going to find that Republicans are being held to live up to their own values and principles, and they should be supportive on this issue.
This last two.
Just to follow up,
one more, and then
one
we'll do the last two
factoid
questions.
here. We had about 20 bipartisan members of Congress who were part of this informal working group who introduced legislation last year. We've already had some people. We just announced it. We had people already who've asked to join the caucus, and I talked to 2 Republican colleagues in the gym this morning who expressed their interest.
Right. So let's just take both of these, and then I know we have votes soon. So go ahead.
Any plan to reintroduce or introduce new legislation on 280E and tax issues, and these 4 issue areas that you mentioned, of which tax is one, are these things that all happen in tandem, or is there a sequence in which they'll be worked on.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes, so in 2013...
Identify yourself.
Stephen Nelson from U.S. News. In 2013, Justin Trudeau admitted that he recreationally used marijuana as a sitting member of Parliament. Here, we're a little further behind, and I believe as close as it's come to that is Congressman Rohrabacher admitting using medical marijuana. Will any of you admit to recent marijuana use, and is it important that congressmen do so?
Do you want to do the tax one first?
The 280E will be standalone legislation, but I think it's more likely to occur in the context of the back and forth and tax work. My friend and colleague Ron Wyden in the Senate, the lead Democrat, is actively involved with that. We will have a package of things that will be moving forward, and I have a Republican colleague on Ways and Means who's going to co-sponsor the 220E item with me.
Okay, and as far as use of marijuana, I've never used marijuana, never inhaled either. I've never used it, but that's not the question here. It's, in fact, how we're going to manage the federal government on states' rights. People want to say they use marijuana, fine, I don't care. But the state is legalized, I don't care who uses it. I'm just going to go forth and say, that's my position, I haven't used it, don't really believe in it, no doubt about that. But the states have a right to make those decisions, and the people have a right to make those decisions.
I personally have felt since 1973, when I started working on it, that it would be hypocritical to try and change the law and be a user. So I would not hesitate for 1 second if a family member or myself could benefit from medical marijuana. Not in a second would I hesitate. But I personally am going to wait until it's legal federally.
I guess, about 100 days ago, I had an operation on my arm here. It was real heavy arthritis. Actually, as a surfer, I actually wore away all of the cartilage in both of my arms, and I can still barely move this one, and that's the way this one was. Well, it was really painful, and I did have the operation, so look at this. Isn't that cool? And so anyway, the point I'm making here, however, is that some people, when we're discussing this industry and this whole option as a possible medical use of cannabis, gave me this candle, and as the candle was infused with cannabis, and I put it on my arm, and guess what? The pain went away for a couple hours, and I got sleep for the first time in weeks after that. And so let me just note, when we're really discussing people's motives, we can be legalistic, as I just was when I said about the principles, that all of these political principles that will guide a Republican's decision on this, but we also have to look at it way beyond this, and I think that we need to touch people's hearts as well as their heads, and we know that it's not good to have spending to try to prevent adults, billions of dollars spent in order to prevent an adult from using cannabis, from smoking a weed in his backyard or whatever. We know that's a waste. But what's even more important is we do have people who we believe can be helped in their conditions, whether it's pain or whether it's they say children who are in seizures might be able to be helped by this. We know that our veterans might be helped. We have a level of suffering in this country, and for us to just sit back with and have some holier than thou police operation to try to control people's private behavior, and it ends up keeping millions of people in pain and agony. Listen, senior citizens, maybe they lose their appetite and they need some help in getting it back. We see that a lot where they get demoralized, living in their old folks' home and things like that. And we see, I talk to veterans. In fact, when I first got involved in this, I knew I was going to be the point person, and I confronted a friend of mine who was one of my big supporters. He was a big conservative, and I said, how do you like it that the guy you've been supporting all these years is going to become a point person on medical marijuana? And he said to me, you don't really know me that well, do you? And I said, no, I know you support me. And he said, well, you don't know that I have a son. Actually, I have 3 sons, and the day after 9/11, they all signed up for the military. and 2 of them came home. One of them, when he came home, wasn't my son anymore. And he said he was having seizures on the floor, that they couldn't do anything about. Now, there are people, not just moms and dads of veterans, but there are moms and dads all over this country, and their child gets on the floor, whether he's a veteran or whatever it is. And for us to say we're going to, number one, we've limited medical experimentation. How sinful is that? Just to limit our knowledge of what this could possibly do. But once, just to give them a chance, and this guy said, so I took my son to the VA and over again, and they couldn't do anything for him. And a doctor in the VA, because it's not legal for the VA to prescribe this treatment, he said, he took us aside and said, see me at my office downtown. And they went there. He says, your son needs medical marijuana. Here's a prescription, and here's how to use it. He says, my son hasn't had a seizure since. That's what it comes down to. People are suffering. The law is wrong. We have a caucus together, a bipartisan caucus. We're going to change that situation.
Thank you, Dana. And again, I think that the question kind of misses the point of what we're arguing here. I've never used marijuana. It's not about whether we use it. It's about what people in our states have chosen to not do, and protecting their legal right to do that. And like Dana, I have friends. I have a cousin who had terminal cancer. He's since passed, and in his final year with chemotherapy, used marijuana to help manage the pain. There was a young man in my district, Purple Heart, came back and helped get off of some of the opioids they were trying to give him at the VA by using medical marijuana to deal with the pain. So, I mean, these are the kinds of stories we hear, and many of the reasons that those of us who are in this battle are in it. So thank you all for joining us, and appreciate you being here and reporting on our caucus.
Good job, guys. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom.
Buddy.
Thank you, sir.